So this is OK here, and we're going to continue our coverage, catching up the match between Bugzilla and Kleerkast. And in the first part of the stream, we spent a long time just analysing one game, game one, in which Bugzilla missed this h5, h4 idea, which was incredibly strong, because then you open up this H file, you have all these double check threats. And we said maybe Kleerkast has some different ideas in the opening instead of knight e5. But okay, well, you can check out the first part of that stream if you're interested. So then Bugzilla was doing very well, but at h6 was a great defensive resource from Kleerkast, and maybe last chance to maybe get back into it was queen g5, but instead this was played, and in the end, in this position here, the bishop moves away from f6 and Kleerkast finds the mate, beginning with queen takes f7 check. So that was game one, a comeback win from Kleerkast as white, having gone to a pretty bad opening position despite being white. Okay, so game two, we're going to look from the perspective of Bugzilla. So he's white in game two, and we're going to use the tiny board as the position in the game, and in the main board we'll look at some variation sometimes. So what we see, there seems to be a little bit of lag, which is weird, between the two boards, is this line from the finisher, where you delay moving these two knights, and the reason you do that is because if this knight had come out, you could exchange it, and if this knight had come out, you couldn't play f3. So he's moved the bishop, Bugzilla's moved the bishop here and has gone f3 now. Obviously you can't do this in Bughouse, because otherwise black could ask partner for a pawn and drop a pawn on f2. So this is a Crazyhouse line. And hi there, Zaraza. Greetings. So we're on game two of this candidates catch-up. So you have a check, and he wants to pick up this pawn next. And he can do it even with the pawn. But by putting a knight, he can't take that pawn with the queen with another check. And takes here, here, and knight h3, and this is the Kleerkast move at g3, which we see. And we're going to see a bit of a refutation of Kleerkast's approach from Bugzilla. So takes, takes, drops a pawn on h6, and so this is the problem with black's position. He's played the French, means his dark squares are weak, and white just goes straight in. And although it's not necessarily even top engine moves always, it's just very powerful. So takes, takes, queen takes, bishop takes the knight, and bishop h6. So if you see, like, the engine doesn't even think of bishop h6, but I think bishop h6 is actually an incredible move. Don't believe a word the engine's saying right now. Queen takes g2, and pawn at g7. And if the rook moves here, knight is landing on f6 next. So at g7, brilliant move. Black trying to get some compensation, just throwing in some checks, but there's nothing. King has found safety, despite being in the center of the board. He grabs this rook in the corner, checks, checks again, puts a knight check, grabs this pawn, and after rook d8, simply rook at e8. A very quiet move. If you do nothing, we're just going to take the rook and rook at e8 checkmate. And if you take this rook, we don't take back. No, no, no. We drop a pawn and then take back. And there's simply no defense. So rook at e8, rook d8, rook at e8, no defense. No checks on this king, which are any good. So, for example, this is covered, pawn check is covered, there's just nothing nothing black can do. So really an opening masterclass from Bugzilla, and this poses a problem for Kleerkast. If he's going to play this line again, he's going to have to figure out how to change things up, because Bugzilla knows how to play against this version of the French defense, E4, sort of delayed French defense. Yeah, so a real problem for Kleerkast after game 2, even though it's one game all. Okay, game 3. Got another d4, d5. So just trying to remember, what was game 1 again? Game 1 was also d4, d5. Game 1 was d4, d5, like so. So Kleerkast in game 3, he's playing a slightly different system with so the bishop is chased back to g3, so he's not fianchettoing this bishop because the bishop on g3 is in the way. So he's developing that bishop to d3. There's a slight, it's weird, there's a slight, these are not syncing immediately, but okay. Takes back, c6, so reinforcing the central pawn. h4, and you don't want to allow this to capture because then the h file will open. So Bugzilla pushes, which looks good. And now from Kleerkast, h5, and we're going to see, this is actually Kleerkast's idea in this game. It's to attack these light squares, and Bugzilla does not like being attacked. He defends very strongly against attacks, and he's putting his bishops to defend these light squares. So here, rook takes f7, and a bishop lands. And he doesn't want, so it's a double attack on the bishop and on the rook, so bishop drops back to defend is good. At e5, hitting the knight, which doesn't really have good squares to go to, so it drops back to h7, takes, and why not bishop takes? So if bishop takes, the problem was queen takes g4, so white was winning a pawn, and that pawn next lands on g6, and so white is winning. So that's why king takes came, just to try and hold on to his outpost on g4, which would be the beginning of any attack on the white king. Rook f4 check here, and unfortunately that's. Is there any other move here to defend this? There isn't really. Knight f6 just gets taken. So steps back, and very nice from Kleerkast. Except Bugzilla did have a resource here after rook takes. And that resource is knight here check and takes here. So okay, we lost this pawn, but at least we deflect the queen away from this attacking diagonal. And we win a rook for a knight. So that would have been a neat idea. And I think that does have to be taken, because if you don't take it, if you say slide across to here, then we're picking up this. So you could get takes, queen takes, knight might come. And then, well, the end of the engine is suggesting a very weird move from black, which is pretty neat, which is bishop at b1. The idea is if you take it, knight at d2. So that's just some crazy moves. And if you take it with the knight, then rook at d1 at once. And if you move the king, we're winning the rook. And if you block, say with a knight, then I'm imagining it just picks up this knight and puts a knight here. So that's and if you block the bishop to stop that, then rook at c1 makes a lot of sense. Okay, so a weird position, very weird position. That's a pretty cool move though. So as cool moves go, bishop at b1. Let's give that a double exclam. Okay, so obviously it's best to take this, and the game goes on. Maybe white has a slight edge, but knight at c2, still a good try here. What happened in the game was instead this, white sacks on black's defending bishop, bishop at g6, and notice just a very uncomfortable position for black to play here. Maybe okay, knight at b4 tries to go on a counterattack. At c2 is good, just super defensive. Knight f8 again, trying to cover some of these light squares. Knight at f4, attacking both bishops. Bishop here defends both, looks good. There was actually a really interesting move here for white, which was bishop to h4. So we're threatening to take this pawn and land a pawn on f6. And this is an interesting move because black has got 3 light squared bishops, which means he can't really defend the dark squares very easily. So this is a kind of, let's switch up our attack onto the dark squares, and how do you defend? And so, for example, if you try and defend with the pawn on f6, this does make some sense. There are many situations where putting pieces on the diagonal your opponent's attacking doesn't make sense. This does, because you want to stop the bishop taking on e7, so blocking that off does make sense. And yeah, there is a reason for it. Why don't you put it here? Because otherwise this h file is opening up, just with bishop takes, pawn takes, and yeah, and either pawn at f6. Let's see what happens. If takes takes, pawn at f6 apparently becomes a problem. You're giving him another, and the h file is open. The h file being open is also a problem. So okay, at f6 makes sense. My voice is going. That's bad. We're just starting. Bishop takes pawn, queen takes. He doesn't have a bishop for e5. We've still got a pawn here. Queen here. And you could just take a bishop and try and grab a bishop here. So there are 2 ways of playing this, which are quite interesting. One is hit the queen. If the queen makes the mistake of going to g5, then you can grab a bishop and stick the bishop on f6. So that's not good. If you go to g4, sorry, let's just go all the way back. Okay. So what was played in the game was knight takes e6. I said I'd have the game position in the small board. So I'm going to show you separately. This is another idea from Kleerkast to go bishop h4, hit the dark squares, takes, 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 queen takes, pawn here, knight here, queen here. That doesn't work because you grab a bishop, so maybe queen here. But then it turns out that queen kind of gets trapped. And this sort of thing would happen. So that's not that great either. So that's one way of playing it. I'm having some lag. How's the stream for people? Okay, maybe try closing tabs. Maybe closing tabs would help. Maybe it won't make a difference. Okay, so the other way of playing it is just going straight on this knight here, and then the idea is knight e takes g6. So you're keeping this knight guarding g2 is the idea. Takes, takes, and then takes here. This is another way of playing things. And if queen takes pawn, there's a very nice move. Bishop at f3, defending that rook. And if you take the bishop, the knight comes here and picks up the queen. I mean, that's just some nice idea. So that's one way of playing it. Just to show how, so this feels like a really good position for white. But I want to show you how white can actually mess up this position. So black has some very deep and tactical ideas if white doesn't play accurately. So suppose you say grab the bishop. Nope, not in this position, in this position. So you just grab the bishop immediately. And, oops, so okay, hang on a second. So this is just to show. So you just grab the bishop immediately, takes back. Okay. Now, what do? We want to harass that black queen. We've got a knight and bishop, so we harass it and we harass it. And on the face of it, this looks great because queen takes g2, rook takes here is checkmate. So on the face of it, this is amazing for white. But it turns out there's some weird and wonderful tactics that black has here. So at d2, and if we take it, we have this and takes queen. Knight here check, and you can't take because you're taking the queen. So suppose queen takes, seems solid. Knight here check, again, threatening to take the queen. And if takes, pawn here. And in this position you think, well, maybe we could just castle out of it. No, you couldn't, because check takes the queen. If you think you're just taking my queen, then you're probably getting mated somewhere here. So if you're taking the queen here, bishop at b3, queen at c2, and then pawn takes rook is mating. So you have to take that knight. But then takes here. And again, you still don't have time to take this queen. Because if you do, rook at c2 is coming up with mate, basically. So that's all just to say that, so castling queenside is a big no-no. Okay, what about another idea? What about rook g1? Rook g1. Nope, that doesn't work either. Rook at h1. And again, if you castle this knight at b3 is a problem. Okay, so probably white's best move is just to grab the queen and block. And the game would go on. He has to drop here to defend the mate. Here again, if you just do an ordinary looking move like takes the bishop, then suddenly white is winning again. Because check, knight takes bishop, winning the bishop with check, and then you get the rook on the board, and you're losing that back rank queen, and trouble is coming. And you might think, but at g2, okay, so there's check, forcing the king onto the h-file, check again, but you can take back. Okay, so that's the sort of check, and then, well, actually it turns out to be a draw. If the king ever runs up, there's pawn here check, and rook h6 takes h5 would be checkmate, so you can't do that. Oh, you could try taking here, but that's also getting mated because of bishop at f5. You don't want to take that bishop, because then this comes and this comes. So that's bad news. So instead you might run, but then there's a very nice move, just back up the rook with a check, blocks, comes up, and simply take all the blockers which are controlled. All of these squares are controlled. The pawns only defend in front. So you can just takes, and it's checkmate. So all of this was just to say you have to be a little bit careful. And this crazy tactic of knight here, pawn here. So, and why is that possible? It's possible because black has material. You just lost that knight. So the best way of playing this position is actually not to give your knights yet, and then what black doesn't have any tactics. So takes. Now there are no tactics. Yeah. So that would be one way of doing it. Or the other way of doing it is right the way back here, actually going knight at e7 immediately, because that way if we get a bishop we can put it on f6. So that way it forces this, and then we're getting a queen. And this looks very good for white for sure. Okay, so just an interesting idea, maybe bishop h4, but instead knight takes e6 was played, and now at least black has a knight in hand. At f7 defends, bishop at h5, and there's a very surprise. This is probably Bugzilla's last chance to keep control of this game, and it's a very surprising move. Is you allow Kleerkast to take a piece with check, and you simply drop back, and actually white isn't dominating this. He only has a bishop in hand. The h-file is kind of closed by that knight, so things are not so straightforward. He might withdraw the knight, hoping to hit the bishop and to hit h6. That makes a lot of sense to keep advantage. Rook takes h6 comes, but then king h8 is the key move here. Just sidestepping this, and I think black's okay. If you were to make the mistake of taking on h7, which seems natural, it turns out you run into trouble because of e6. And you can't take it because otherwise knight takes and white's pieces are coming alive. You could probably go bishop here, takes, king takes, rook takes, bishop here, check. That's just trying to get the queen in on g6, so he has to try and block that diagonal urgently. f5, trying to takes, pawn here. Okay, so this is not so good for black. Knight takes pawn being the very nasty idea because he wants pawn here check and pawn here checkmate. He's got pawn here check and push this pawn for checkmate, and he has the pieces in hand to do it. So you have to defend, try and defend, but yeah. Anyway, the line goes on and on. So I'm going quite fast here. So knight g5 is actually the strong move in this position. I also even discussed, there were some other, so you might think, if my queen's under attack, what about moving the queen? And moving the queen, it turns out, gets you into some trouble, because there's knight f3 check, knight here check, takes here. Take this knight, and then you'd have a mate like this. And if you move the queen up, like so, then what do we have? We have two knights and a rook in hand. Well, we could grab that knight and then put a rook on e2, takes, and use that knight to get mate. So yeah, anyway, so some very sharp positions, but so black's attacking idea is get a pawn on d3 attacking the queen, try and make something here, and white's best approach is actually just to ignore that, because taking the queen turns out to be a mistake, because this leads to checkmate. Check, bishop here check is checkmate. So he can't take the queen, he has to find something else to do. So yeah, okay, so I'm going a bit, this is kind of going a bit too, and I forgot to turn off the sync. Okay, so instead what Bugzilla played was at h7, and that turns out to be a mistake because Kleerkast crashes through on these light squares, takes, now hitting the dark squares, takes, hitting the dark squares again, and actually after bishop takes e7, actually Bugzilla resigned, because if knight takes, this comes, and pawn here, and if queen takes, obviously it's even worse. With at f6, takes, queen takes, and we have the bishop coming in. So a really nice game from Kleerkast, just hitting on the light squares, then hitting on the dark squares, and he takes a 2-1 lead in the match. I'm sorry if I went into too much detail in some of those lines. Okay, so game 4. And Bugzilla could easily have just played the same line as in game 2, but he tries to mix it up. So takes, knight here, and knight takes e5, knight takes e4. Now we are still in games which Kleerkast has played before, so we could even be in preparation. So why don't we take the knight? So the reason we don't take the knight is because then we lose the queen with check, and then if at e2, if we take here, there's bishop here check, and it's just very hard. These squares are controlled. So if we block, we just takes, queen here check, and takes here is coming if you block. So if you step back, the very nice move from black is at b2, And the point of that is if you take with the bishop, if you don't take with the bishop, you're threatening to get a queen on the back rank. And if you do take with the bishop, what's the move? The move is bishop takes d3 with a double threat, pawn at d2 mate, and also queen to e2 mate. How do we defend both? Probably at d2, stops this and stops this, so that's the best try. But then simply queen takes bishop, now that rook has to go somewhere, and simply pawn at c2. And we can't even castle. So that's a rip moment. Okay, so, and again, I keep on forgetting. I'm supposed to be putting keeping the main position here and lines on this board. I just forget sometimes, so I'll try and do that. Just to see who else is streaming. St. Louis Chess Club and Game Over Bro. Okay, so cool to see we're featured on Lichess. That's really nice of Lichess. Really appreciate it. Okay, so knight takes e4 was played, and now Kleerkast plays at f3, and we're still, I think, okay, if I just open up the opening explorer, I think, so you see Kleerkast Schwanet in 2018. Okay, so it's actually not such a common line. But Kleerkast has definitely played this before. Okay, so takes here at f3, rook to g1. Okay, so let's just look at this position a moment. So why can't we just take on f3? After all, it's defended by the queen. The reason we can't is bishop at g2, hitting the rook, so we win a whole rook potentially. If the rook moves, then we're taking on f3, probably knight takes f3. So if this knight takes f3 is coming, and that's absolutely just killing it for black. Oh, so apparently knight at d2 is holding on, although it looks like it's just losing a whole rook. But maybe we're losing our knight, so it's not so straightforward. Rook at g1. Okay, it looks really unpleasant for white, but apparently the engine still thinks it's holding just about. And so it wants to play this in this position. Knight takes pawn, just going desperado with that knight and then taking the rook. So that also makes sense. But okay, it's still not the best. So rook g1 makes sense. Bishop at e2. Queen d2, knight c4. This queen is being chased. Okay, now it's a really nice move from Bugzilla. On the face of it, you might say, hang on a second, isn't white's king less safe? There's queen at d1 as a mate threat if queens are traded. But no, because we can take it back with the bishop. The rook covers d1, and now we have a mate threat on d8. And suddenly black is on the back foot. So it's an interesting position where it looks like white's king is less safe, but actually the trade of queens would actually benefit white. And here Kleerkast played f6, which doesn't look so bad, but we'll see. Bugzilla really plays this nicely. Queen h5 check, no pieces in hand, so g6. Now steps back, threatening f6 again, and this is really uncomfortable for Kleerkast because the natural move bishop g7 runs into at h6, ouch, and bishop e7, as happened in the game, runs into at g7, rook g8, queen takes h7, king is evacuating from the premises, check, check again, and is everything okay with the, yeah, testing, yeah, it should be okay. Grabs an extra pawn. No, it's not grabbing an extra pawn, he's just taking the material because it's defended. Takes, because it's defended. Takes. Black only has a bishop in hand, so just taking all the material, and in the meantime the black king is stuck in the center of the board, and now is even losing the queen. So black resigned. So notice all of the first 4 games have actually gone with white. So it's 2 games all after 4 games. Okay, so Kleerkast plays e4, and we have a bishop e7 line from black. So this interesting move, king h1, is to try and avoid some of the mating ideas that arise when the king is on g1, like drops on h3. So king h1 means black's attack is just delayed a little bit. So it's an interesting idea. Okay, so I'm not going to go into some detailed opening theory which I don't know about, but the basic idea here is white is sacrificing a piece for a pawn and is probably going to go on a light square attack. I was thinking, yeah, at f5 would be the natural continuation of this light square attack, because you want to hit all these light squares. But instead he goes takes here, which doesn't look too bad, takes, and then at f5. And surprisingly, that's not so good. Okay, so in fact, black is fine here, apparently. So knight takes h2, king takes h2, at f4. So it turns out black is doing fine here. Takes, knight here checks, steps back. Just to say, if we take this bishop, the problem is queen takes here. Bishop at d6 comes. We could push this, but then there's simply takes, and if queen takes, knight at g4 picks up the queen. So it's a bit of a problem, this pin. So yeah, so because of that, this is actually a good move, I should be saying. Yeah, e takes d4 is a good move. But okay, instead knight at g4 was played first, king drops back, and then he takes on d4. Queen takes here, and we don't quite have the same tactic. And another interesting move here for white is to take on f7 and then drop on g6. That's another way of playing this. Takes, rook defending, and just trying to... So this would have been an interesting way. I think this would have been a good way of playing for white. Now try and get the queen trade, and then we can get that queen with check, and it'll soon be mate. So this is just a... Okay, again, I forgot to keep the main board fixed. So I'll just do that again the way I mean to do it. Bishop takes f7. It says it's equal in the analysis, but I think this is actually really strong. Takes, and pawn here. And white is crashing through on these light squares. Takes, knight here, grabs this one, and loses his queen for a knight even, but it's just crushing. You can't even just do this because of knight h7, his mate. So you have to take it, and then you're winning the queen with check, and this is soon getting mated. Okay, so back to the game. So what was instead played was queen takes f4, d takes c3. Again, bishop at d6 was slightly stronger because you're controlling all of these squares. Bishop takes d6, you drop back, then you take this knight, then you just simply drop a knight here, and you're threatening mate with the pawn here, so you have to take it. Takes, queen takes, rook here, and pawn takes pawn, threatening to take the rook with check, and rook here checkmate. So he has to move the rook and then simply put a pawn on g3, hitting the queen. So this is, which doesn't really have any good squares to go to, because at f2 is coming next. So yeah, that would have been a really so bishop d6 really strong from black. Instead, he grabbed the material first, and now bishop takes f7 is working better. Is a very fast attack from white. So bishop d6 didn't give any time for this attack to work. So rook takes, pawn here, king back, takes the rook, queen here, pawn here, threatening check, and at f7 check. So all kinds of attacks. Takes. Very nice move from Kleerkast, throwing in the check before taking on g6. In fact, he doesn't even take on g6. He plays the superior move, knight at e5. So really strong attack from Kleerkast. He grabs the queen. Bugzilla doing his best to defend, knight e5. So you might think, why not just take the bishop? Yeah, taking the bishop is fine also, but he goes knight e5, then takes the bishop. Probably taking with the pawn is even more powerful, freeing up the g6 square for a knight. But okay, he took with the knight. Knight here takes. C takes b2, and now it's white to play. And sure, there's this threat of pawn takes rook equals queen, but white here, Kleerkast, could just have gone all in here. So we're gonna leave this in the small board, and then I'll show you what he could have done instead. So he could have just go all in, knight at g6. And you can't really avoid it, because here, bishop here, that's not a good idea. So takes. Okay. If we take back, it's not check, so what we do is we keep the check. Queen here, check. Takes, king takes, bishop at h7. If you don't take it, try to sidestep this, and then takes here. This just doesn't work, because bishop here, rook g8 is mate. So the pawn is more dangerous than the rook. But now, we want to go queen here, but the knight is covering. So what we do instead is bishop at f7, and if king here, then rook at h8 is checkmate. And if knight takes, then the queen comes in, and the rook here is checkmate. So, and if you take immediately, there's a similar line. Takes, king here, rook here. Oh yeah, so this is actually slightly, we need our rook in hand in this line. So we get a second rook, take. You could sidestep king h6. Rook at h7, king here. We need that second rook, rook at h5. Takes the pawn, and then we want to go queen to f5, but we can't. So here's the trick. Bishop at f7, takes, and then queen f5 is mate. So yeah, pretty nice picture there. So white's got this really great attack going if he just goes for it. Knight at g6. What happened in the game instead was he moved his rook, knight at g3, and here again, beautiful move here is just give up the queen. Instead he played it this way. He played it this way, but let's just look what would have happened if he gave up the queen. So it turns out you can't take that queen, because knight at g6, takes, and it's a pin. That's why it's important to keep the rook there. So king here, knight at f8, takes, and at some point, the point is, if you take with the bishop, this becomes, yeah, this square becomes. So the reason he's taking with the rook is because he wants to keep an eye on g8, but you take the rook, and then queen at g8 is mate. So queen takes g3 was the move there, just to keep that rook on the h-file, pinning things. Okay, but he took rook takes, still white's doing very well. Knight takes f7, but now he kind of goes all in. Queen takes g7 is a mistake. The thing to do here is just to continue to play solid, some move like bishop at e3, for example. If yeah, so if he doesn't like knight takes knight, then something like queen takes g7 might be working with all these pieces in hand. He went immediately for queen takes g7, and the problem is there isn't quite mate. Yeah, I mean the rook is defending is the problem. So he tries this, it doesn't work. Turns out bishop at f4 is the best move to both defend and attack. Really nice. That's a really nice move. Bishop at f4. That's a brilliant defensive and attacking move. You'll see later why that's such a nice move. But instead he played this, takes, knight here, check, steps back, and yeah, that rook is just defending everything. He takes the rook, and now Bugzilla to play and mate. And just to make sure I have people paying attention, I'm going to cover up. I'm going to cover up the moves and make it a puzzle. Can anyone see what Bugzilla, the move Bugzilla found in this position, which led to checkmate? So it's black to play with 5 pawns, a rook and a queen in hand. Black to play and checkmate. Let's see who we have in the chat. Any strong players who can see this? Black to play. Any ideas, anyone? Okay, I'm going to give it another maybe another 10 seconds and then I'll reveal. So black to play and checkmate. Actually, let's give it a little bit longer. So we want checks, but if we just do a check from distance, white's got plenty of pieces in hand to just block the check. So the first move is fairly straightforward, just takes. And now probably lots of things work, like bishop takes knight and lots of things. But the nice way of finishing it is at g3. If you step here or here, queen here check or queen here check is mate. So you better take it, but then queen here is checkmate. The 2 diagonals are cut off and this square is also cut off. So yep, the king has nowhere to go to. So that's called a magnet mate. You're drawing the king into a square. Now what actually happened in the game was bishop takes knight, then knight here, queen here, and Kleerkast resigned because this is coming. So after queen at h2, Kleerkast resigned because it was mate next move. But actually, even nicer than this is at g3 with mate next move, whatever white does. That's a pretty picture. Okay, so Kleerkast later said after the game he felt this was a turning point in the match. After all, he had a position where he had mate here with knight at g6, and he was playing this e4, e5 main line, and so you can't play e4, e5 if we're going to go into stuff where black is much better. So Bugzilla probably knew this opening theory, knew the opening better, and so that rules out e4 as an opening for Kleerkast. And then even despite the fact he turned the game around and got into a winning position, he didn't deliver the key blow with knight at g6, with just taking everything and then drawing that king out. That was the finish. So, and whereas when Bugzilla had the chance, he did find the checkmate with rook at h7, rook at h2 rather. So that was 3 games to 2 and the first break of serve in game 5. And nice mate, says Zaraza. Thanks. Well, Bugzilla says thanks. So Bugzilla in game 6 was white, and what do? We see a repeat of this line, which Bugzilla won very convincingly in game 2. So Kleerkast really has a problem here, because how does he do things differently? And so what he does differently is he doesn't go here for takes, knight here. The first time he went for this and then at g3. This time he goes for at g3 immediately. Takes, comes. Knight takes e4, hitting the queen. Queen takes g2. If you look at the engine, it says +10 for white, but Kleerkast has a habit of playing this line and really causing trouble for white, because although it is +10, the white king is quite exposed. Queen f3, so saying I want a queen trade, which makes sense because saying that he reckons he can do something with the queen. Knight c3 came to defend the bishop, because otherwise you're just losing a whole piece. And there's a surprising best move here from black, and it's pawn at g2. Why pawn at g2? That pawn is just going to get taken, and what's the point? There's a reason for pawn at g2. It's because there's an idea that neither player really right. So I'm going to come back to this. There's a move here for black, for white rather, for Bugzilla, which he didn't realize, and it's a really strong move, and it might even be the move that makes Kleerkast stop playing this at g3 idea, which would be a shame in a way. But it's at g6. If you can't take, because rook takes rook is very strong. And if you just look in hand, we have another pawn in hand. So this is what makes this work, is if takes here, we have another pawn in hand for f7. And if takes here, then we can grab that knight and then move our knight over with a check. We have another knight in hand if we ever want it. This is just all about deflecting that queen from this diagonal. There are no squares on this diagonal where that queen can stay, so you deflect it. And then you go queen here, check. And the reason we wanted to deflect it is because we want to take this bishop next. But we can't because of this rook. So what we do is we deflect the rook by rook takes h7. So if he takes back, then we just check. And then a very nice move is just pawn at b7, saying we think our king is safe. And the threat is simply knight to f7, checkmate. The king is trapped. And that turns out to be very strong. If he doesn't take it, if he just goes, okay, check, then we just move our knight back and block. And then he takes, blocks, ouch. Ouch, ouch, ouch. We're winning the queen, basically for free. So all of this is to say that at g6 is very, 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 very annoying. Very annoying. And that's why the move here for black is this, just to get that rook off the h-file, so at g6 can be met with h takes g6. Having said that, white's got some interesting ideas here, and I think Oppa would like this move, rook h6. And the idea is if you take the rook, then we grab the knight with check, and then knight at f6. And wherever he goes, here or here, queen at e8 is checkmate. Ouch. So you can't take that rook. It turns out rook h6 might not be the best move, because black can just ignore it and go at g3 and so on. But it's just very interesting. So at g2, very interesting move. Gosh, I keep forgetting to do variation on the main board, main game on the sideboard. We'll try and remember. Okay, so bishop d7 came instead. At g6 was missed. Instead, queen at d3. And just to say, this whole game, Kleerkast played Burp Cow, by the way, just earlier on in the candidates, and it went like this. Pawn here, check, takes, takes, and from a few moves ago, very good position from white. Kleerkast turns it around, and black's attack fizzles out, and there's no mate, and suddenly it's Kleerkast who's winning. So that's all to say he's played this before, and he has this way of getting out of these very bad positions and ending up winning. So queen at d3 was played instead of what Burpcow played, which was a3, which is very good, by the way. A3 is good. But of course, neither move is as good as at g6. So queen at d3 was played. a6, hitting the bishop. Bishop a4. g2, rook g1 at g3. So pretty good attack here from Kleerkast. Knight e4. And already Kleerkast is doing very well here. Even to the point where where black has to sorry, I meant Bugzilla is still in control here, but Kleerkast has a really interesting try here, which is queen takes bishop. That looks like you're giving a whole queen for a piece, but actually you're getting that piece back with knight b4. Because if queen here, what's the move? Bishop at d5. Oh, bishop at d5 picks. Oh, I see. So we've got two pieces hanging. Okay, so that's kind of tricky, because we have to keep an eye on this as well, and we want to keep an eye on this. Yeah. So that doesn't work. So it's pretty tricky. So if this, you can just take it, and now we have a threat here. So it turns out queen c4 is a bit stronger, and then the key move here is simply rook takes pawn to just defend. So we're getting rid of an attacking piece, but also defending. So queen takes bishop is interesting because black will win another piece for the queen. So it's a fair trade, two pieces for the queen. But instead, Kleerkast is a little bit desperate, goes knight takes e5, and Bugzilla basically takes control of this position. So takes, 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 bishop takes, knight takes, queen takes, and Bugzilla is in control. He just needs to just play solid moves like this. It turns out what he did was actually a bit of a mistake, because that pawn can just be taken, takes, and now he has got actually an amazing counterattack. He played bishop at c6, so both defending and attacking by defending his attacking pawn, but he really missed a trick here. And the really nice move he missed is knight at g4 check. So obviously if we go here at f2, so that's out of the question. If we go here, bishop at f1 check, that's going to be weird, that's going to be game over. Anyway, let's just do the obvious thing. King takes g2. Then black has another brilliant move, and it is at f2. On the face of it, we're just threatening to take the rook, but we're not threatening that. We're actually threatening something entirely different. If you move the rook, we're dumping a knight on e1. That's the real threat of this pawn at f2. If we takes back, promote to knight, and pick up the queen, and there are no pieces around the white king. So he's even though black only has very few pieces in hand, white is finished. So white's best defense is probably just to go bishop at g3. So defending this knight here check with takes, takes, takes. And takes queen, king takes, this sort of idea. Oh, so bishop at c6. Oh, sorry. So bishop at c6 apparently is played first. Okay, my bad. Bishop at c6 first, then at f2 is the correct approach, and then takes, and then we have an extra attacking and defending piece on the board. That's why you want to do that. And then magnet into the corner. Why would we want to do that? Because then we got this check and take up the queen. Oof, that's painful. Rook at h1. Wow. And in the meantime, our bishop is protecting our king. You see, so if we ignore the move order, I'll just show you why this is a problem. Bishop at g3 takes, and we go rook at h1 here, takes, knight at f2 check, king g1, knight takes queen. So we don't have the same defender. Does white have anything? Apparently this is still bad. Okay, so black is still good here. But obviously having the bishop defending, what you'd be worried about is throwing this knight away and then dropping a pawn on e7. So throw this knight away. It doesn't work actually because knight takes, defends. So there's no cast away of that knight that that allows you to drop a pawn next. If you cast away this knight and you took with the pawn, then things would get hairy. This to try and survive longest. Yeah, then things are getting hairy, basically. You first clear away the back rank, then you try again, and now you have to take it, or the queen is landing and it's promoting. But now, knight at b8 is coming, and that will soon lead to mate. So what about if you just took it straight away? What's the mate? This is not an easy one. It's knight at b6, clearing away. Probably rook is better. Yeah, you save the queen up for the last moment. Okay, so let's get back to the game. Bishop at c6, like in the small board, was played, and so let's resync up. And here, Bugzilla finishes things off. Bishop here just simply moves the king out of the way, and he goes in. Black could have tried knight at e3, and you've got to make sure you don't go to c1 or you lose the queen with check, but as long as you don't go to c1, same idea. If you take the queen, unfortunately you're getting mated. And will in a similar way to happen in the game. So let's just get back to the game. He just grabs the queen and white is now ready to deliver the mates. So check. Now what's happening here? What's happening here is this bishop is defending two squares. So after this, probably this is correct, but there's an even nicer way of doing it, which is to drop a pawn here, deflecting the bishop and then take it, and then go in and get the mate. But okay, the way he did it was also good. Knight here check. Actually, again, instead of knight there check, a queen or a bishop here is again a little bit nicer, because if you take it, knight drops and you get a very pretty mate. So notice, what's the theme here? The theme is you draw the king out and then you stop him from running back. It's a very important theme. Covering the escape, and it's checkmate. So after queen here, you'd probably have to run back. And in this position, there's a very neat mate in 3. Queen takes rook, knight at c7, and rook in the corner. It's a nice little pattern to know. Okay, so queen at a5 or bishop at a5 would have been even nicer, but okay, the way he did it was fine as well. Check, check, and just take all the defenders. And again, he finally used this bishop is overloaded, so deflect it one way and then attack the other way. He gets in, and finally a very nice magnet a rook in the corner, drawing the king into the corner, queen at a7, checkmate. So Bugzilla has seized the match by the scruff of the neck, has gone from 2-2 to 4-2. And now Kleerkast as white, what does he do? He has to return to d4 because he was outplayed in e4 last time. And he goes back to d4 and fianchetto system, which he actually did very well in the first couple of games. In game 1 and game 3, he's done very well. Takes, and again he's got a nice, looks like he's got a good position. Takes, at e5, queen d4, just putting pressure on f6. And here, there's perhaps a surprising move. Just go in. That black king is exposed. Give up your queen. Takes. And now that queen is defending everything. So knight at h5. Maybe you move the queen. Knight takes e4. Why would we want to take that pawn when we already have a pawn in hand? So the reason is because if you take it, so you kind of have to take it, otherwise the knight is coming in to the attack. So you have to take it, but then takes. We've got 2 pawns. That's why we do it. With 2 pawns, we can drop one on g7 and then another on f7. And this is pretty lethal. If king takes f7, rook at f6, and rook takes, queen here check takes here is one idea. What other ideas are there? Queen at g5. What if we block with the bishop? Just take it. And if we and now if you take with the rook, we're taking this potentially. Rook takes, queen takes. So black just doesn't have enough defenders on the board is his problem. And if you take with the queen, of course, you all know what happens next. Knight at h6. And of course, if you don't take it at all, well, you know there's a problem with leaving a pawn on f7. Sometimes you can get, that helps support a rook. If your opponent has a rook in hand, that's not always such a great idea. Or if your opponent can get a rook in hand. And in this position, it turns out to be mate, because of knight here, check, king here. If you go to f8, just f7, so queen here, and it's a smothered mate. So, gosh, I keep forgetting to keep the live position, the main position on the small board. I'm not used to this. Okay, so knight at h6 was played. Okay, so queen takes f6 was missed, but this looks nice as well. But hang on a second. So this looks nice if the king is pushed into the corner, but hang on a second. It's giving away a piece, and then takes, pawn here. So maybe we get the piece back, but it seems like black defends. Okay, it turns out white does have an amazing move here, which is knight takes pawn, threatening to take the queen with check, so you can't just ignore it. You can't like go and grab the white queen. So you have to take that knight basically. And with that, and then knight at f5. So this is just complete nuts. This whole line is complete nuts. But and we're threatening knight takes rook or knight takes queen, both with checks, so you kind of have to take it. And then queen takes bishop. And you can block, but we're getting another piece. So we sack 2 pieces, we're getting our pieces back. And then what a normal player would do is put the rook on the back rank, and they'd soon lose the game because black would counterattack with moves like at f3, knight at d4. Yeah, knight at d4, at f3, black's counterattack comes, and black's attack is faster. So very important here to assess whose attack is faster. Black's attack is faster, but we just play a move like this, attacking intent and defending, and now white's attack is faster, and so white is winning. Then knight g5 is a nice counter because it blocks the threat of bishop takes h6, and it puts pressure on f3. So the game would go on. Knight d5 hitting the queen, you better move the queen, I'd have thought. But if you go takes, and you don't have time to take back. So why don't we just take this immediately? Hang on a second. Bishop takes knight immediately. So the problem is takes check here, bishop takes knight, queen takes, and bishop at e3 back again. Seems good. Okay, so apparently, okay, so one way of doing it is this, blocks, just goes in, and there's no time to take the queen. Is there time to take the queen? Okay, you can take the queen, but white is doing very well here. So it takes here, queen takes, pawn here, check, trying to get knight at h6, so you have to take with the king, but then there's no real defense. Bishop here is a really sneaky move, because you just want to, if you block, just takes, and then rook at g8 is checkmate. So bishop at e5 is like a really, why am I not, okay, I'm really annoyed with myself. Okay, so this is the game position, and what I'm analyzing is, instead of this, white has a really amazing move with winning a pawn, dropping another knight here, and then getting a couple of pieces, and then defending. And this is a good way for black to defend, but then attacks the queen, throws in a check, and bishop takes rook, loses the queen again, but goes in. At f7, just gets that king out, and then a really annoying move, bishop at e5, and there's simply no defense. If at h2, you can actually just take it. Taking it is good. But suppose you sidestepped. So if you take it, it's fine. White's completely winning. But if you sidestep, maybe black throws in a few more checks. So takes, queen here check, takes. Obviously, you do not take with the rook, because otherwise suddenly you find you lost a very embarrassing game with what could sometimes be called the OK mate. If you go here, that's the funny mate where the two knights just mate you. So you have to keep on running up, but now we have a pawn and a knight, and so this one, king comes up, and another diagonal will deliver mate. So so you've got to be careful here. You have to take with the king. At h2 would come again, and you don't take it, because otherwise that's bad. Then you sidestep. If you take it, you have problems of knight at g4, takes f2 sorts of ideas. So you sidestep, he'd have to sack again. Takes. Now he's only got one rook left. Takes here, knight here. Maybe this is the last point, you have to be a little bit careful. King here, rook here, king here, and he has nothing. Takes. Bishop here, step back. You've got to be careful here. If you go to h1, you are mated with bishop here, check, king here, and bishop here, check, king here, knight here, check. And this is actually really pretty. Okay. So, bishop here, check, step up. Bishop here, check, step up. And we want to do bishop here, check, but it's not defended. So instead, knight here, check. And if bishop takes knight, then our queen is free. Woohoo! So pawn takes knight, but now this square is defended. So bishop there, check, takes. Bishop takes pawn check, blocks. Bishop takes pawn check, here. It's the power of the two bishops. So it's just quite a nice little sequence, how the two bishops would just mate you. So it starts here, and just gradually the two bishops just make their way up the board. It's quite a hilarious situation. So you can't go to h1. But if you go to f1, then you're okay, because you just keep running. So it takes a pawn, and you could drop a pawn here, but you just step in front of it, and there's nothing. So just to say again here, you had to be careful, because if you go here, then bishop at g1 and rook at h2 is checkmate. So you can't go to so h1 was okay. Even f1 is dangerous, because then rook here check, pawn takes pawn check, and the problem here is queen takes bishop is coming with check, so the king has to run to try and get out of that check. Rook here check, bishop here check, and he's forced onto a dark square, and you're taking that bishop with check, and suddenly things are all gone wrong. Suddenly things have gone completely wrong for white. So it's the kind of position, if we just back up all the way, with that initial at h2, you can sidestep, but probably it's safer to take it originally. At h2, it's safer to take it because the knight checks are covered. So if the knight checks are covered, why not take it? You can sidestep, but then you have to be very careful. So this is, notice if you take with the king, you do get mated, because then the king gets drawn onto the g file, and then what's the mate? The mate is bishop at f3 check. If this, knight at g4 deflects the bishop and queen at g2 is mate. So that's why you have to take. If here, queen at e4 is mate, so that's why he has to sidestep. If here, knight at g4 and queen at g2 is mate, deflect, this bishop is overloaded. Can't defend the knight check and the queen mate. And that's what's going to happen. Takes, king takes, and suddenly g2 isn't defended, and the game is all over. King h3, bishop at g2, driving that king up the board, and queen at h3, checkmate. So, yeah, you have to be a little bit careful. So after pawn there, bishop takes is necessary, and then you have to be very careful not to step onto h2. Sidestep, takes. Here, if bishop at h2, by the way, then you can just sidestep or take. Everything's fine. Rook at g1 takes. Knight here, just take it. So black has nothing. But okay, just a very interesting how to attack discussion, basically. So knight takes d5, very powerful. Knight takes d5, and but okay, this was played instead. Knight at f5, hitting the queen, takes the rook with check, sacks the queen, and this looks good. I mean, so this is slightly less good for white, so black is still okay. F3 takes, bishop takes. Yeah, so black is actually the one pushing for a win here. But he must find the right move. And for sure, the black queen is hanging, but knight takes queen doesn't come with an immediate mate threat. So, and this is a key move. At e4, if the bishop backs off, bishop at f3, we're coming in on those light squares, and we have a queen in hand. You're not getting out of this. And you can't even take this, because this bishop is actually supporting this. So if takes, it's still there. And you can't even do a move like this, because remember, even though the queen is under threat, it is keeping an eye on this square, g2 square, and this is the threat. King takes pawn, queen takes g2. And if you take here, oh, that is tricky. Did I miss something? No, it really is quite tricky. King takes h2. Huh. So I was thinking the move is this, Yeah, I mean, it's not the shortest mate, but this is like the most obvious mate. So if we take the bishop, queen here is checkmate. If we take like this, then queen here to here is checkmate. So it's really obvious that you have to take with the f pawn. Wonderful. And then we take again. King takes, so now the king is hoping to run. Not so obvious. Not so obvious what to do here. So there apparently is a mate with queen at h2, but it's a bit complicated. So apparently at f3, so he has to take it. Queen takes c3, just getting an extra knight in hand. And if you keep running, you're never going to survive. So that's just really not going to work. So you might as well just take it. But then queen at e4 is mate. Okay. So, well, there's nothing else you can do really. At e3, queen at e4 here, and bishop here is checkmate. Okay, so really important idea, the queen takes knight to finish things off. So that's why at pawn here, pawn at e4 is the winning move from Bugzilla. But pawn at e2 was played. And the point is, remember, if bishop takes pawn, we're getting the bishop on g2 and white is mated. Same mate as we showed before. But so knight takes is forced. And now bishop here, defends, must defend with the bishop. Notice, if you defend with the pawn, takes, and drop on g2 is mate. So must defend with the bishop, takes, and Bugzilla has to settle for this draw. He doesn't have better because his queen is hanging. He has to settle for the draw, but oh, he could have done better if he'd put the pawn on e4 instead of e2 to start with. e2 was like a little trick to try and deflect the bishop, but it doesn't work. Knight takes, and all he has is a draw. So pawn at e4 was so strong because of this bishop here, which he didn't make use of. He was obviously afraid of this, but he forgot this bishop is supporting. So Kleerkast gets a draw in the end in this game. Kleerkast gets a draw. If he were to get a win, yeah, his way of winning was finding some crazy lines like knight takes c5 in this position, and that would have been interesting. But okay, they're quite complicated lines, this game. So I think I'd have some more analysis of why can't... Oh yeah, this is actually really interesting. Why can't white defend like this? This is very creative, because you might think bishop takes bishop, knight takes, and if bishop g2 takes, actually there isn't a knight check, because this knight covers h4 and this knight covers f4, so there's no knight check. So maybe white's okay, but he isn't okay, because this bishop would then come into play. Boom, opening up this diagonal, threatening bishop takes knight. Rook at f4 is maybe best try. Takes, you can't take with the rook because knight here would come, so king takes, knight here check, just grab this rook, knight here check, try and run, rook on the back rank, takes, and seal him off and smothered mate. So, and there's no real other thing that could have been done. Knight takes f1. If you don't take it, then something is landing on, a knight is landing, say, on g1. So either a knight is landing on g1, or a queen. If you take with the king, then a rook is landing on g1, or a queen is landing on g1. So whatever you did, it's trouble. Rook at e3, pretty neat idea here. King d2, knight c4, and if you take that rook, then takes. And wherever the king goes, if this way was promoting and mating, and if this way, then easier is to do this and knight here checkmate. But okay, the point is, the real point here is to open up this diagonal, and black is in control. So white has to settle for the draw. White has to accept the draw. So yeah. So at this point the game was 4.5, 2.5, with 3 matches to go. But interestingly, because last time, okay, so we're going to see a Scandi from Kleerkast as black, so changing things up in this game. And this is often a nice idea, just bring the queen out. Often this is a bad idea in Crazyhouse, but in this position it's quite nice, because if takes, you're eyeing this square, you're eyeing this long diagonal. So it's coming with ideas. Also, if you ever hit the queen, there's always queen e4 check. So okay, so takes, hits the queen, takes here with check, at e2, and this is obviously a position Kleerkast has played before. Say 2 months ago he played against Matza, takes, and in this position he played knight at f4, and that is a good move in this position, both threatening mate and threatening to take g2. Queen b5 check was played in that game with Matza, but then the move is bishop at c6. The idea being, if you take, you don't take back, instead you throw a check in first and then take back. Unfortunately, I think what happened in the game was bishop at d7 and things get a lot more complicated. Takes, even queen takes is possible. King takes, knight here check, bishop here check, and grabs this knight. And you can't grab the material yourself, because always the bishop comes back, and this comes, and black is getting crushed. This square is open. This square is about to break open. So black has to be careful here, and that's why the right move here is not bishop at d7, it's bishop at c6, with the idea of check and take back. Check and take back with the pawn. So knight f4 is definitely a nice move in this position, but instead Kleerkast goes for this check first, queen at e4. It's something maybe you should keep that in your reserve, that check. Then knight at f4, knight e3 defends, and it's a complicated position. Bishop at h5, at g4 trying to defend. Probably a nice move here is just g4, because then if bishop drops back you can use your next pawn for h5. But okay, at g4 was played instead, more safe approach from Bugzilla. He likes to keep his king safe. Bishop dropped back, knight to g5, and apparently that turned out not to be a good move, because it just hangs the g2 pawn. So sorry, was the little board not updating? I'm now confused. Suddenly it's gone back to the previous game. Okay, knight g5. Let's just, why are we not updating? Okay. So that was the move played in the game. Probably knight h4 is better. What's the idea of knight h4? Okay, so temporarily it defends g2. But the real idea of it is to actually grab this bishop. And you might think, why do you want a bishop? Well, it does open up the h-file, that's the negative. But the reason you'd want that bishop is throw in this check, blocks, and oops, that queen is trapped. So that's why you'd want it. Takes, and white should be doing okay here. But instead, this came, and unfortunately g2 falls, and white is not doing okay here. Rook f1 takes here, and the simple way of winning here is just stick a pawn on g2, and black's crushing. But instead, this happened, pawn on g2 came eventually, well, knight on g2 comes the same thing, and it was a slower game, but this only one person is winning this game. Knight takes rook, bishop at g3 check, and knight at g2 check, and white resigns. And the reason white resigns here is because if the king runs here, there's a simple smothered mate, blocks, knight at b2 is mate, and if you run here, then there is knight takes e3, just to keep that knight. If you go here, rook, no, not that, pawn here is checkmate, and if you go here, then rook at g2 is checkmate. So strong win. Strong win this game from Kleerkast. That was a bad mistake from Bugzilla, this one. And Kleerkast won this game. So he draws up to 4.5, 3.5 with 2 games to go. And Bugzilla is black in game 9 and plays a wolf defense. Notice c6, why c6? I mean, the engine might also like bishop d7, but the idea is if bishop d7, white is trading his bad bishop, his pawns are on the color of the bishop, with black's good bishop, the bishop supporting at h3 in the future. So c6 is logical. a3 is an unusual move, so the question is how to refute it. And the answer is not knight takes c2, because otherwise white crashes through on c6. But it is to go desperado on this knight, probably. So maybe knight takes d5 is the best. Takes, and then takes the bishop. So we win a pawn this way. And white can't really do this. He can't really take that rook, because pawn e2 comes, and black's attack is pretty nasty. So he could just move the rook, but then we can begin our own attack. Takes. Unclear who's winning this. Knight takes rook, bishop takes knight, rook here, sidesteps. Yeah, so really unclear who's winning this. So maybe knight b takes d5 is not the best approach. It's just unclear. Sorry, that should have all been... Let's get back to the live position. What is going on? Sorry, I'm not using the small board correctly. So knight b takes d5 is certainly interesting, but what happened in the game was simply taking the bishop and losing the knight and castling, and then giving up this pawn. So black loses a pawn. Oh, and then wins it back. Okay, so fair enough. And so the question is, whose attack is faster? White wants to attack on h3, black wants to attack on h6. Takes, pawn h3. Who's attacking here faster? This is actually really tricky for black. It looks like white's attack is faster. And notice rook here is just a game-losing mistake, because you're going to lose one of these rooks, and rook at h8 is checkmate. So black instead counterattacks. The rook sidesteps. Knight takes f2. And here, I mean, probably white can just do this. Just takes, and a very nasty little move, rook at e8. The idea, take, knight at f6, picks up the queen. So that would probably have been the nicest approach from white, but now the rook gets out of the way. But so black's maybe okay, but he's got a difficult position. He's got to try and not give up a rook, for one thing. So knight e4, and the threat here is to take on d6 and then come in on f6. Okay, so black plays bishop at b6 check, which is interesting. Another idea is also, so an interesting move here is at f5. So you're afraid of this, but there's no time. We take immediately here. That's why this is an interesting idea. And this would be a really tricky move because we can't take this, or this is checkmate. So that's the kind of things we have to watch out for. So against knight c7, what do we do? Oh, we can go check and then check and then take the knight. That's the problem. So yeah, this is a really great resource, this bishop at b6, but maybe needs to be saved up for the moment. So at f5 is really interesting. At f5, knight c7, nice try, but then we do this. And probably black's doing quite well here. But okay, the problem with bishop at b6 immediately is king can just take here, and we have this live threat again of taking here and knight at f6. What do we do? At h3 we can just... Okay, you've got to be careful here as white. You can't step forward because otherwise pawn here check, and we're actually getting mated. There's enough to mate that king if he steps forward. But he can actually survive, and you can't step into the corner because at g2 is mate. But the king can survive by just going this. King f1 here, and king e2 here, and then counterattacking. And white's actually doing very well here. Takes, rook here, pawn here, trying to get that rook. And this is just lethal. That's just deflected the knight from f6, and we're coming in on f6. Takes. Takes the queen with check, and eventually delivers mate. So all of that is why king takes g2 is probably the right approach, but you have to know how to run the king afterwards. But okay, instead he moved the bishop back. And here the best approach, of course, is just to takes back, and then put a pawn on f4. So we're taking control of the dark squares, but instead he put the pawn on f4 directly, which allows white to take. So white is sort of surviving a little bit here when he shouldn't be. Bishop at d4, bishop at h4. Again, probably the best approach was just grab that knight. And the idea of it would be, of grabbing the knight, is sure, your opponent has this, takes the rook, but that queen is coming back and defending. So black is actually doing very nicely here. White could take the pawn first, but then same kind of idea. Okay, so bishop at h4 check, takes, bishop takes, king takes, at h3 steps back, at g2 steps here. Black doesn't quite have what he thought he had. Probably the best he has now is just queen takes knight. And at least the bishop is guarding f6, but this is pretty healthy for white. So bishop here check, threatening knight at h6. Hard to say. You can't take this because otherwise everything is crashing through. If bishop takes f6, just takes the rook, knight here check, pawn here check, bishop here check. You're taking that queen with check is the point. Even if you sidestep, we're just taking the queen, and if we take here, we're going to make sure we take that queen with check by going pawn here check, pushing the king onto a dark square. And it's all going to be over soon. So, queen d8. What should white play here? The answer, what white should play here, he played queen h5. The best move is what the original idea, knight takes here. The idea being, if you take back, you're just losing your queen. So that's really bad news. But also, where does your rook go? If you go here, then this is knight at f6 is coming. That's a really bad idea. So the rook has no squares. So knight takes pawn is just really crushing from white. But okay, white played queen h5, and it turns out that's also good. King takes pawn, bishop at h6 check. One final chance for Bugzilla. At g3, defending along a color class is sometimes a mistake. And this is one of the examples where it was a mistake. At g3, allowed just simply f takes g3. And if you take back at h2, oops. Knight at g4 check. So why not? So we can't take g3 with the bishop because just knight takes, it's all safe. But simply knight at g4 check. If you just step back, pawn h2 is mate. If you go queen takes, you're losing the queen. So that's looking hairy. But if you do this, king takes, that is, you're still losing the queen because knight f6 discovery and picking up the queen. And white doesn't have any mates. So yeah, at g3 was a big mistake, in time trouble, no doubt. But simply at g4 was played, and white's back in control. Takes here, knight here, check. Simply king f2, and black had nothing. Knight at f6 is coming, and black has no pieces in hand to defend. So what should black have played? Of course, knight takes pawn, simply. As we said throughout. So a good win from Kleerkast to actually tie the match at 4.5, 4.5, going into the final game. Kleerkast is black. What's he going to do? We go into this line again, do we? f3. So this is interesting. Even though we know f3 is good, Kleerkast's confusing at g3 plus 10 for white has sufficiently scared Bugzilla not, because the last game was so confusing, not to play it. So he goes into this. f3 comes with a delay. Knight goes to g5. So Kleerkast missed an amazing move here. And the move is knight takes d4. Okay, so it looks like we're hanging both our knights. So what's the idea? The idea is if we take this knight, then bishop c5, and if we're really greedy and we just go and take the other knight, then bishop takes knight will come. We could drop a knight on e3, but then we put pressure. If we just slide into the corner, then the idea is actually queen h4, and we want to get knight at g3, checkmate. But okay, that would be way too greedy. Why not just do a sensible move like bishop here, defending our knight? What's the big deal? Then there's a very crazy move, queen to g5. So we're putting pressure on that bishop, but we're also threatening, after we take a knight, some sort of knight h3 ideas. So if bishop takes queen, bishop takes knight. And we're getting two pieces for the queen, and maybe an attack. But what if we just try and stay solid? Queen e2, takes that knight, put a pawn on f2, and the point is, if you go into the corner, then you've actually got queen takes g2 and it's checkmate. knight here check, king force back, pawn at g2, checkmate. So king h1 is not a brilliant move, it's a super blunder. What if you take rook takes, then there's knight at h3 and takes the rook, and that's also pretty nasty. Black is doing very well. So rook takes f2 is also, I'd say, a mistake. That's clicking the wrong button here. So what is the move? Bishop takes f2 might be the best try. But even then, black is doing very well with a move like knight at f4 with a double threat of taking the queen and checkmating on g2. Oh, so maybe rook takes f2 isn't quite so bad, but okay. Which is the worst? Yeah, they're probably equal. Okay, so going back to this initial position. Why am I not syncing? I'm not syncing the board. Sorry. Going to game 10. This was played, but what I'm showing you is the line where instead he takes here. And the first thing to check is why not just take back, takes here and defend, and this is the idea. Takes, 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 and then takes here. So you can't take the queen now because of the pin, so he has to take back, and then pawn at f2. And if bishop takes, knight here, if rook takes, knight h3. That's the idea. Okay, so that's if you take that way. What if we take the other knight? If we take the other knight, simply bishop c5, and we have a double check threat. So it blocks the diagonal, takes anyway, takes the bishop, and hits the queen. And this is apparently fairly decent. The queen drops back, then bishop at d4 check is played, picks up the pawn, and so on. So difficult position for white to play. So what's the engine's best approach in this position? It takes this knight, bishop c5, knight at e3. Yeah, but it seems like black is a very promising position. Okay, so let's get back to what happened in the game, which was knight to g5. So a bit of a shame, that was really nice, but knight to g5 was played. f4, knight comes back to e4. Okay, so black doesn't seem like he's doing too badly. He's got his knight in a really good position. Takes, takes, knight at g4, knight at g5, develops the queen, doesn't want sacks on f7, rook b1, rook b8, h3, knight f6. Yeah, a bit of a shame he has to move the knight back, but what else? And the problem you have in this position is black has no moves. And Bugzilla recognized that. He just chills, just slowly improving his pieces. Black simply has no moves. To the point where he just sacks his knight for a pawn to try and make something happen. Put a pawn on g3, takes a7, takes g7. Very, very bad position for black. Just his pieces can't get out. Really sad. Takes. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, really unfortunate position for Kleerkast there. His pieces just couldn't get out, and his one chance really in this game was knight takes d4. Knight takes d4 in this position, just going for it, and bishop c5. And there are lots of lines here, but definitely would have been an interesting try. Queen g5 is not the only approach. There's ad f4 and other approaches, but definitely an interesting try. Takes the queen would be the most principled. Takes back. Maybe knight at f2 is logical, but then this, yeah, knight takes bishop. This is just very comfortable position for black to play. He has he has a pin he can work on. He can put another bishop on this diagonal. This is really, really comfortable. Really hard to know what to do against this brilliant move. Knight takes. Let's see if it's ever been played in the database. Never been played. Okay, so we have two novelties for you, one in game 1 and one in game 10. Let's see this. 7 times knight g5 has been played in this position, and knight takes d4 has never been played, and it's probably the most interesting move. So there you go, 2 really interesting novelties, one in game 1 and one in game 10. Try them out. So knight takes pawn is black in this position. Let's just flip the board for you so you can see. Basically, in general, don't move that knight. A pawn on e4 is also a nasty thing. But knight takes and get the bishop out and just untangle your pieces. And back in game 1, I suggested a novelty for white in this position. We'll again flip the board. A novelty for Kleerkast in this position, instead of playing knight to e5, how about knight to g5? With ideas of sacking on f7, king takes, and the idea is f3 and put a pawn on g4. So we get the piece back, and the king position is slightly disturbed. This seems pretty decent. Knight seems like a decent try, and it's never been tried. Maybe black's refutation is to go here to get pressure on here, but then knight b5. So who knows? Maybe the bishop then comes back. And who knows? Is knight takes f7 still so bad? I mean, that would be my hunch. But f3, bishop h5 at g4. So if takes. I think the problem, black might have bishop g6 and this, which is slightly concerning. But no, it looks like, yeah, this is still an interesting position. We're threatening to push f5 and blow open this f file. So yeah, this is interesting. I mean, the engine thinks black's okay, but I think it's still interesting. Or he wants to block off the f5 square in this position. But okay. Okay, if anyone is streaming the Crazyhouse Shield, if that's still going on, then I'll raid them. But if not, then I'll see if there's anyone else streaming whom I could raid. But okay, that's been it for me. It's just me and St. Louis Chess Club. The US Open chess is what people are watching. Okay, so I'll raid Fiancetta, who's streaming the US Open chess, which is in its final day. So that's very interesting. Let's give her a raid. Hope you've enjoyed this little catch up of Kleerkast, Bugzilla against Kleerkast. Thanks everyone for watching.